So I want to talk about making a web page or HTML page interact with a PHP page. So for example, suppose we've got this HTML web form and the user types some things in here and they hit this button. Often what happens is this button will call a PHP page that will take the information that the user typed and do some processing, calculate something, output some information based on what they typed. So we need to make this HTML communicate with a PHP page when the user hits that button. So really the two steps for doing that are, first, both of those files need to be in the same directory. So your HTML and your PHP file need to be in the same folder. So for example, in my htdocs folder, I've got my formpage.html source file and the PHP file that is calling, which is called myfile.php. So both of those files here that we'll be working with are saved in the same folder or in the same directory on your machine or on your web server. So I've got them both in the htdocs, but they could be in a subfolder as long as both of those files are in there. They're going to be calling each other. Second step is, in your HTML source code, you've got to set a value. Okay, so both files are in the same directory, but when the user hits this button, we need to put in the source code for this page what PHP file is going to be called. So when they hit this submit button, in our form tag, in the action property, we need to put the name of that PHP file. So again, mine is called myfile.php. So I've got that inside the quotes for the action. The only thing to watch on that is make sure it's spelled right. If it's lowercase, uppercase, make sure it's the exact file name of your PHP file. So that goes in the form tag in the action property. Your name of your PHP file. So that's really it. Both files should be in the same directory. Make sure you set your action property for your form equal to the name of the PHP file that will be calling it or be processing it. So now I want to switch gears and talk about the actual code we need, which is 2 or 3 more steps to take something that the user has done here on the web page and do something in PHP with it. So let's look at the code and then we'll talk a little bit about how that works. Let's say, for the sake of argument, they're going to type their name here, maybe an amount here, choose a payment or whatever. So I'm just going to, in my PHP, I'm going to declare a variable for username that they're going to type into that page, I'm assuming. So I'm just declaring a PHP variable there. But here's the key, or here's the code to get something from an HTML form. It's going to be $_ and then post in all caps. So there's no spaces in that. $_ post, followed by square brackets, and inside the square brackets are going to be single quotes. So after post, again, there's no spaces here. Square brackets, single quotes, and then I'm just closing or ending it with the semicolon, like every line of code. So that's basically going to say, okay, get something from a web page, that's what that post is telling it, and store it in this local PHP variable called username. But what we put in here, again, we're going to have to go kind of back and forth between our PHP source code and the HTML source code. Because what we put in here, it has to be the name of that text box from the HTML page. So the way to determine that, we'll just look at our HTML source code. So we got 2 text boxes on here because this is a drop-down box. So if I look at my source code, the first text box has a name of TB1 and the second text box has a name of TB2. So if I'm expecting to get the username from TB1 in my post, that's what I'm going to put. I'm going to put a valid item name from my HTML in here. So this isn't just some arbitrary value. This is whatever its name in the HTML. Here's the text box. Here's the name property. Match that up exactly with what you're getting in your post method. And basically, if anything's been typed in that TB1 text box, it'll get posted to this page and stored in this local variable. So just for the sake of an example, let's go ahead and do the other one. Give it a try. I want to show you one other thing with getting values from the form that are straightforward. So I think this is going to be an amount, so let's change this to AMT. And this is going to be getting it from TB2, right? So that's what I need to put here. And again, if you don't know the name of the text box, look at the source code of the HTML. Second one is called TB2. So that's going to get that and put it into a different variable here. Let's try echoing one of those out and we'll see how it works. I'll just echo out the amount variable instead of doing both of them. So what should happen if the user fills something in, it should get sent to this page, retrieved from those text boxes, put in these local variables. So if we echo it out, we should see it here. So there is that value that we got. Could be any value the user might have typed, so we don't really know what it is, but we're getting it from the post method, storing it in this AMT variable, so then when we print it out, we've retrieved, done something with what the user has put into that form. So it's just $_post, square brackets, single quotes, and the name of your form item inside those single quotes. Let's look at one more thing, and that is the drop-down box. So typically drop-down boxes in HTML, they're called select, and they have the option values. They typically have a name too, so let's call this DDB credit card. So I'll call it DDB-CC, something simple. So that's the name I've assigned it in my HTML. So this is slightly different than the text box, but not really. So the text box, we would just do post name of the text box, which we can look in here and see. The option value or the select thing is the drop-down box is the same thing. It should have a name in here, and we would retrieve that using that same method. So let's do that real quick. So let's just, I'm just going to flip this variable to call it C card or something. And that name of that drop-down box was DDBCC. So you can retrieve that just like you would from a text box. Again, if you put a lowercase c here, it might say thing not found, so make sure it matches exactly what's in the source code. And let's print this out just to make sure. So that is going to show us one more thing I want to talk about with drop-down boxes versus text boxes. And that is, since this isn't a free-form text box, so if this was free-form, you know, they could type whatever they want in here, and we would retrieve that. But these are preset values, right? The user can't really freely type in here. So how do we know if they chose Visa or did they choose American Express? Again, if we look at our HTML code, when they choose American Express, what's going to get sent to our PHP is the value for that. So if they choose this, the value of AMX should be sent. If they choose Discover, notice a lowercase discover will be sent. So that kind of shows you not only how to get something from a drop-down box, which is really straightforward, it's just the name of the drop-down box, but also what value is being sent. So if they choose American Express, that's what value is getting trapped in our variable, and we'll be able to look at, process, do something with in that C card variable. A couple other things I want to talk about real quick, and that is the naming of your PHP variable versus the naming of the thing in your HTML code. So sometimes what new people that are coding do is they'll call this uname, right? So they'll call this box, or let's call this C card, right? So maybe in their HTML they called it C card, and then in their PHP they call it the exact same thing. I would recommend against that, because then you're putting this in here, and it can get a little confusing. So that's why I would recommend if name this something like drop down box CC or something different than what you would name it in your PHP variable over here. That way you don't have two things that look identical here. So this would be the name of the item from our HTML, and this would be the name of our local PHP variable that we'll get, use, do whatever with just within the PHP.